came to be. So Nigeria to America was born over almost 2 years ago, and it really was born out of the desire to help fellow international students. So since we've grown, our entire role, our purpose, or our goal is to work with internationals, both home and abroad, give you the resources, give you the guidance, give you the information that you need to succeed in your journey or in your path to the US. However you choose to come. So if you're going to come through school, if you're going to come through work, our goal is to serve as a platform that gives you those resources that you need to succeed in your journey. So that's a little bit about us. As you can see, our tagline is to enlighten and empower. So through our YouTube sessions, through our mentorship initiatives, through our videos on Instagram, and through webinars like this, our goal is really to enlighten and empower you to be successful and to make better decisions. So we're international students, or we used to be international students, and we work with everybody, people like us, to help each other be better. So that's a little bit about us. Okay. Now, in today's session, we're going to be hearing from Wole and Chioma. Now, they are both previously used to be international students as well. They both work in consulting. Wole works as a manager at Bain & Company, which is one of the big three management consulting firms in the world. And then Chioma also works as a senior consultant at Ernst & Young. And they'll be telling us about their path to consulting, how they got into consulting, how they decided to, why they chose consulting over other industries, for instance. The pros and cons of this industry, and then their experience in the industry as well. Now, I also work in consulting. I work in technology consulting, and I'll also be chiming in, during the session. But that's a brief overview of what we're doing today, and thank you all for joining us today.
Awesome, thank you, Yewande. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over to our panelists. Wole, if you would like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional background.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Wole Adegbulugbe. So you guys can get to know me a bit on the personal side. I have two boys. I'm a huge soccer fan. Go Red Devils. And as Yewande mentioned, I'm a manager in Bain in the Chicago office. I'm originally from Nigeria, and I moved to the US in 2014 for business school in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon University. I first joined Bain as an intern in 2015, and then I joined Bain & Company in the Chicago office full-time in 2016. Since then, I've worked across a variety of industries, and I spent 1 year in Nigeria in the Bain office as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have about working in consulting in the US, working in consulting in Nigeria, and about moving to the US, frankly speaking, as well. Happy to answer any questions you have across any of those topics.
Thank you. And Chioma?
Hi, everyone. My name is Chioma, and I started my career. First of all, I went to Covenant University, and I originally studied accounting. So I kind of transitioned from accounting to consulting. So happy to answer any questions about the transition later on in this webinar. But I worked in investments as an investment analyst in Nigeria, as well as in the banking sector for a while. While in banking, commercial banking, I did a bit of strategy consulting, and that was really what piqued my interest to make the transition to the US to go to business school so that I can transition from accounting to consulting. While I came to the US, I studied in Washington University in St. Louis, so not too far from Chicago. And after my school, I interned in as an investment analyst too with the firm, but I got a full-time role with Ernst & Young. So I currently less than a year with the firm as a senior consultant here in the St. Louis office. So happy to answer more questions along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Chioma and Wole. So we're just going to jump right into it. Either of you can go first. So how did you navigate finding a job in consulting? First of all, actually, why did you get into consulting? Did you consider the career paths, or I know, Chioma, you mentioned that working in strategy in Nigeria piqued your interest, but other reasons, did you look at other industries, or how did you get into consulting?
I can go first. For me, coming to business school, my two main goals was either to go into consulting, so specifically financial advisory. I knew that I wanted to specialize straight off, or to get a role in corporate finance. But while navigating the whole recruiting and everything, I realized that I did not have enough experience to get the corporate finance role. So I kind of pivoted towards of the financial advisory roles since I had some experience in financial services. So that's basically why I decided. And part of the reason, like I said before, was I did some strategy consulting within the bank, and that piqued my interest. Why I really enjoyed, why I decided to go into consulting is just the fact that I get to work on different interesting projects and really make an impact within firms. And I'm able to just the global connectedness, getting a lot of learnings from like both online teachings in the office and just from based on the project that we work on. So those are the things that made me decide to just go into consulting.
Great.
Yeah, I can jump in here as well. I studied computer engineering in undergrad, and so my background was engineering science because I sort of loved solving tough problems. But frankly speaking, as I was finishing undergrad, I didn't know what exactly I wanted to do. I knew that I, sort of didn't want to do technology focused work. I was more interested in strategic issues, helping companies navigate tough problems and tough questions. And so my sort of evaluation of different industries started from there. Uh, Ultimately, I started off my career working with a tech firm, strangely enough, but I wasn't necessarily playing a tech-related role. I was a business analyst at Venture Garden Group in Lagos. And in that role, it sort of exposed me to two sides. One side was, on the technical side, helping to transition or translate problems that businesses were trying to solve into what technical things we could do to help them solve those problems. And on the business side, thinking about funding, thinking about how we organize the business, thinking about operations as well. And as I started that journey, I realized that I loved more of the business side, more so than the thinking about how we translate those business requirements into technical requirements for our technology teams to go execute on. The other thing that I realized that I loved a lot was the company was well diversified in terms of industries. And so I did work, in aviation, working with the federal aviation authorities in Nigeria. I did some work with education as we're trying to launch some online learning platforms. I did some work in power as well. And I just love the fact that I was able to transition context and I could find sort of common themes across the different industries and I could offer value across those different industries. And so my interest in consulting grew from there. And I tried to get into consulting in Nigeria before I came to business school in the US. I actually applied to a variety of consulting firms in Nigeria to try and, sort of go in that space. Ultimately, I decided that the best way to give myself that opportunity was to get an MBA. And so ultimately I transitioned to the US and I was, dead on focused on getting into consulting as soon as I started a business school in the US.
Thank you, Wale, for that background. So I'm trying to juggle responding to Zoom chats here as well. If you could please just send your message, not privately, but send it to the entire group so that Yewande and I can respond to you. That'll be helpful. Thank you. All right. So next on top of mind for everybody is how do you apply and get into consulting? Especially everybody knows that consulting firms are famous for their case interviews. So if you can just touch on that as well, what your experience was like getting into consulting and the entire application process.
Yeah, I can start first on this one. And like I said, I have experience applying to consulting firms, both as an industry hire and through school, which are the two general ways to try and get into consulting. And I can speak to the first one first, which is the industry hire. That is typically a bit more difficult to get into. Like I mentioned, when I was in Nigeria before I moved to the US, I applied to a variety of firms. I think I remember applying to EY back then as well. When I was in Nigeria, PwC, McKinsey, a host of firms. And for that, the reason I say it's typically difficult is you need to differentiate yourself in a pile of a ton of resumes. What consulting firms are looking for are generally, I think, fairly the same across the board. People who have problem-solving abilities that are exceptional, people who can work well with teams, and people who have sort of the leadership skills to engage with clients and help clients solve some of their toughest problems. And so you need to try and showcase those things in a resume, and it's much tougher when you have to do that on one sheet of paper, and there are thousands or hundreds of thousands of applicants doing the same thing, trying to showcase themselves. For the industry hire part, the other thing you can try to do to increase your chances is making sure you understand the firms you're applying to really well and finding ways to build informal, maybe formal networks with people within those firms who can be sort of your sponsor or who can vouch for you on those three dimensions that I mentioned. So that's the first path. On that path, I wasn't successful. I applied to a ton of companies. I got interviews with some of them. I got to multiple rounds of interviews. Ultimately, I wasn't successful on that path. And then the second path, like I mentioned, is through school. And I did that as well when I moved to the US in business school. And that path is typically a bit easier, mostly because a lot of these consulting firms have target schools to start with. Luckily for me, my school, Carnegie Mellon University, was one of the target schools for, I would say, several consulting firms. And so they would typically send representatives from the firm looking and scouting for talent in those schools. And so you have a better opportunity to get to know the firms a bit more and understand what working with those firms would be like. But you also have a chance to impress those, not like you're trying to impress, but you have a chance to show them sort of the skills that you have across those three dimensions that I mentioned. And so, you build those relationships, you apply using your resume, but they have a bit more context on you. And that process is usually a tad bit easier than the industry hire route. I can talk a bit more about the case and interview process, but we can start off from there. Chioma, I don't know if you have anything else to add on that.
Yeah, so in terms of the industry hire perspective, I would just chime in a bit because I haven't gone through that route, but I know that when we are recruiting for industry hire, just being on the inside now, we really look at resumes to see how much transferable skills that you have. And for my department or industry specific, we like to see people that have experience in what we do. So for me, I'm in the wealth and asset management industry. So we usually like to see people that have like financial services, specifically wealth and asset management experience, and you've been able to translate what you have to the table. So, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be UX experience because I know some people that do transition from other countries, but you have to be able to put your resume in such a way that they can understand what you're saying and what value that you bring to the table. And then for the school route, the only thing that I would add to what Wole said was, if you're looking to get into consulting, like the big, like BCG, Bain, EY, and the rest, you have to have a very good GMAT score because that's something that they really look at. Like, I'm not sure what the cutoff mark is. Do you know? But I knew that was for internship, to be honest with you. That's why I didn't even apply to a lot of them because I didn't have that. I didn't do GMAT and I wasn't prepared to do it because of the consulting. I did the GRE. But if you want to do consulting, that is a good start. Then you have to have your LinkedIn profile very good, very like good to go. If you can get someone to do it for you or do it yourself, then you start networking because in the US, they have recruiting circles. So you have to be aware of that and start networking ahead of time. Make sure that your resume is up to date, as well as do case preps before you land those opportunities. But my school was a target school for a lot of the companies, the firms, but it wasn't a target school for EY. But so I met EY in a conference. So we have the Black MBA conference and some other conferences that these firms go to. So that's on that way you can reach out and meet them. Sometimes they don't come to your school if you're not a target school, but you can also meet them at these conferences. So you can also leverage that in your recruiting journey.
Awesome. So you mentioned the concept of target school. For those that don't know what that means, could you explain?
I can talk for Bain on that front. Bain typically, again, I sort of mentioned there is thousands of applicants, probably hundreds of thousands of applicants every single year. And so Bain sort of does a job figuring out where they think they have the highest chances of getting candidates that sort of suit the profile that they're looking for. And so we have, from each office, there's a set of target schools that would typically invest in heavily, would go to those schools, we'll have presentations there, would have representatives on campuses there. And there are usually some fringe schools as well that would, say, we wouldn't invest as much, but if we get applicants from these set of schools, would, typically consider them and would evaluate them as well. that's what you call the target schools. And for Bain in particular, in the Chicago office, I think we have about 15 of those schools that are sort of the target schools that we've sort of been successful in the past getting the right set of candidates. And so instead of casting our net really wide and having to sort through a ton of resumes, we sort of focus on those target schools. Having said that, we do get applications from people who are not in those target schools, and on a case by case basis, based on sort of networking, like Chioma mentioned, or based on some expertise that we find on resumes that really jump out at us. We consider those, but typically I'll say probably 85-90% of hires, maybe even 95%, will come from those target schools.
That's good. And so, Chima, I know you did not go to a target school. Are there other networking opportunities that you can that people can go to meet some of these recruiters?
So my school was a target school for Bain, BCG, and McKinsey, but for some reason, EY wasn't on the list. So, but what I would say is, if you want to meet companies that are not in the target, you're not on their target list, you should leverage conferences. Conferences are very important, like the National Black. I think there is the NABA, which is the National Association of Black Accountants. There are a lot of conferences that they are looking for talent, and if you have what it takes and you're prepared, like you prepare your interview, you prepare your resume, you have a high possibility of landing an interview from those opportunities. And then, like Wole also said, I would not underemphasize the use of LinkedIn, because for my present job, I actually networked through LinkedIn. So just make sure that you have your profile up to date and you come forward with your A game. That doesn't mean you go to LinkedIn and immediately message a person and say, I want a job. But like, and use that, look for people that have commonalities with you, that the jobs are interesting, and ask for coffee chats or phone calls, and then take it from there.
That's good. And so for interviews, do you have some tips on how to prepare for the interview, especially the case interview? How did you go about the process? Are there books that you recommend, or is this just based on your experience in your MBA program that prepared you for that?
Chioma, do you want to go first? I can go first. I can go
Yeah,
first.
you can go first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll go first now. From my own experience, like I mentioned, I had been trying to get into consulting for a while before I even got into business school. And for me, the first step is giving yourself enough time to sort of prepare, because what I describe it as to recruits, typically, it's a dance that you have to learn. There is sort of the structured way to go through a case interview, and you have to learn that dance. Learning that dance takes some time, just like learn the rudiments of that dance. And then beyond just learning the basics, you then have to add your own personality, your own way of thinking into that dance. And if you're trying to learn a new dance, it's not just I'm going to go, in 2 days, I'll just like learn it and I'll be ready. So give yourself as much time as you need to sort of learn what the process looks like, and then start building in your own personal style and your own personality into how you sort of go about the case interview. In terms of resources that I used, I found there were a ton of resources first online that you could leverage. The things that I think I found most useful were, there's I can't remember the first name of this guy. There's a Cheng sort of look over my shoulder interview video series. It just sort of helped me to just understand that dance to start with. Like, how exactly is a case interview structured, so you don't speak out of turn, you sort of understand the cadence and how that conversation flows. And then beyond that, there are a ton of books that I read as well. One of them being, I think the name of the guy is Mark Constantino or something like that, that has a ton of sort of frameworks for thinking through business problems. Because frankly speaking, in a case interview, there may be like 7 or 8 types of questions you can ever get, right? Because it's always about a business problem. It's about a business trying to grow their revenues, trying to reduce costs, trying to grow profits, trying to expand, trying to launch a new product. So it's always a sort of a common set of things. And so I use that book to sort of get up to speed on basic structures for thinking about those types of problems. And then beyond that, there's a lot of practice that goes into it as well. Because if you're trying to learn a dance, it's not just about reading books. Beyond reading books, you have to actually practice. And so I had a group of friends in business school that would spend, I'd say, 3 to 4 hours every week, just giving each other cases so we can learn the dance and get used and comfortable to walking through that dance with somebody while you're in front of that person. That's the third thing that I think is most critical in that case interview journey.
Great. Before we move on to you, Chioma, so somebody is asking, is it Victor Chang? The
It,
book
it
that you
is.
mentioned?
Yep. Just remember that.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
cool.
It's a video series, and I think he has some audio series as well. And a lot of those resources are available online. And you can, go through to just learn that dance and go from there.
He has a couple of
Cool.
books. I'll just share me. He has a couple of books as well. Adela Adishaba actually just asked, what's the name of
What
the
is the
book?
name
I
of it?
think Wale was referring to video series, but I know Victor Cheng has a book called,
Or is it
or
Case in
somebody said
Point?
Case in Point. He has
Yes,
one
that's
that's called
it's case
Case
in point.
Interview
Yeah.
Secrets.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a video series or it's a book?
He
They're
probably has
two
both.
different things. Yeah. There's a Victor Cheng video series and maybe audio series as well that you can get.
Okay.
And then there are books that Victor Cheng also wrote. And then there's a different book by Mark Consentino, which is the Case in Point book that somebody put in the chat.
Yeah.
Awesome. Chioma, is there anything that you'd like to chime in here?
Yes. Just like what Wole said, recruiting for consulting is very time consuming. That is one thing I would put out there because like you said, you have to practice at least 3-4 cases a week. And you practice not just but you should also be practicing giving cases to other people. That way you can also see what mistakes and errors that people make and you'll be able to self-correct. Another thing I would like to say is the different firms like BCG, McKinsey, EY, every firm has their different type of cases that they give out. So you also have to look at the companies that you're targeting and you have to look at the cases that they give specifically. There are a lot of resources that I don't have the name of and that you can go and see past cases that they gave to other people, to other people. So that also helps you to be able to be more prepared for the type of cases. In terms of resources, there's one that just comes to mind right now, and I actually have it here to give out to whoever is interested. It's called Crack the Case by David Oval. Yeah, so that was also very helpful as sorry, I'm seeing the chat pop up. So
Yeah.
helpful and also just looking at videos like Wole has said. And something else that people used to do too during internship, I knew that people that were recruiting were also getting people from industry to give them cases. I didn't go that route, but I would say you should leverage those resources if you have them, because those people already, more likely than not, they have done some interviews and you can be able to give you pointers on, okay, this is how you did, or this is what you should do better. So just leveraging both your classmates, but people are also in the industry and making sure that you're preparing specifically for that company that you're going to do the interview for so that you are well prepared for whatever types of cases that they like to give. So for example, for EY, I think my case was more like finance driven. It was more of the profit, which helped me because I am more of a numbers person. But if you're going to recruit for like a McKinsey, I think theirs is more like higher level strategy-wide cases. So there's those nuances and differences that you have to prepare for. So that's why you have to get as much information as possible when preparing for whichever interview that you're landing or company.
Thanks for the insight there, Chioma. Yewande, is anything that you'd like to add as well for case interviews?
Yeah, so I'll just add a different perspective, or I guess a different perspective. So I work in technology consulting. I work for Deloitte Consulting, and I actually got in through campus recruiting. So I had to go through the case interview process, but like what you guys are saying, mine wasn't as strict because it was from campus. I'm not an MBA hire, so I didn't have to go through the core business school. Like, you guys have rigorous training and like case interviews. I didn't have to do that. I have an MSc, so I got in through like my MSc. So the resources I use, because your like Victor Cheng and Co, they really focus heavily on management consulting, strategy consulting. Since I was going into technology consulting, I had to know how to speak to it from a technology perspective. So I had to have a good understanding of the business perspective as well as the technology side to it. So I didn't read any books, but I went online. I watched a lot of YouTube videos on case interviews, technology consulting case interviews, and then my company actually had a lot of resources on their websites about sample demo cases. And actually, one of the cases I had in my interview was structured around one of those interviews, which really worked in my favor. But I had to go on the company's website, and I realized a number of these consulting companies, they actually have case prep resources on their website that you can leverage. And my company also assigned us, I don't know if this would be the same for you, Wole and Chioma, but they also assigned us case prep buddies who, like someone from the company who works at the company, will actually walk you through a case and guide you through like what you would be expected to, how you'd be expected to answer, and ask you some of the leading questions that would guide you as you respond to the case interviews. Now, this may be because it was on-campus recruiting and not the experienced hire up, but that was my case interview process. So the resources I used were YouTube, and then I also found a couple of case interview prep websites as well. I don't, none of them comes to mind right now, but there's one particular site, I think it's Case, something to do with Case Consultant. I just subscribe and I'll get the new resources every week. And then in terms of practice, like Chioma said, find somebody and practice with them and have them ask you questions, kind of like, because the way a case interview works, somebody has to keep asking you questions around the business process. So have them ask you questions, but you have to practice. You can't just practice, you can't work on your own. You have to practice with somebody else. So just from that perspective, that's what I have to add to that.
Thanks, Yewande. Also, some background. I did work in consulting initially before transitioning out. One thing that did work for me, because I came in from bachelor's level, so I don't have a master's, so I got recruited into consulting straight from bachelor's. And one thing that worked for me, again, I worked in tech consulting like Yewande, is just understanding the language of the industry that you're going into. So like Chioma mentioned, if you're going into finance consulting, learn to speak of finance consulting. If you're going into tech consulting, understand what tech consulting is about and the language, so that way you can speak to it. And when they're asking you questions, you have a background on what they're saying as well. So just something to say and chime in there, depending on which route you choose to go into in consulting.
Just to add one more thing on interviews, I know most people focus on case interviews, but every single firm goes beyond case interviews. There are always interviews that sort of get at your experiences, your past experiences, that try to tease out what leadership skills you have, what teamwork skills you have, and you working within the context of a team as well. So a lot of people sort of disregard that part when they're preparing for interviews with consulting firms. It's a very critical component as well. And as much time as you're dedicating to the case interview process, you should dedicate to those parts as well to make sure you're well prepared and you're a well-rounded candidate when it's time for the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
definitely agree there.
Yeah, just remember my own recruiting experience. Actually, before you get to the case interview, you have to have had a round of interviews with different people, and they are trying to see what transferable skills you have from whichever industry you're coming through, just through the interview, using the language of the industry that you're joining. So all those components are very important. And you also have to be personable, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with each other. So they want to see that they are open and someone that they can have good conversations with and things like that. So that's also very important. And aside from the case interview, I actually had a behavioral interview, and I don't know if it's something that is very popular within the industry, but the behavioral interview was really, they were giving me a lot of scenarios of things that I could face in my day-to-day life and asking me how I would respond to those situations. For example, I remember they gave me an example of what if you had a situation where your client gives you a lot more work that is going to cause your deadline to move. How would you respond? So I also had a behavioral interview portion of my own recruiting. So that's also something to keep in mind. So depending on the company that you're going to be recruiting with, they would let you know ahead of time, and hopefully you can do some research and be able to ace the interviews.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Chioma. I think summary here is there's a lot that goes into getting into consulting. Understand the specifics of the company and the industry that you're planning to work at, and know, do they have series of behavioral interviews? Do they have case interviews? How do they structure their case interviews? And there's a lot of work, so give yourself time to do that as well. So thanks everyone for providing that insight. So you mentioned that getting into consulting, I mean, you need to go through all of this process. What do you think has worked well for you in that process? If you were to just pick one tip for everybody that is listening, what would it be? Chioma.
I'm trying to understand the question. So you mean what worked well for me in the recruiting process, right?
Yeah, just summary of everything that you said, like one tip that you would share with people.
So one tip that I would share with people is, if you're in that process, try as much as possible to get someone that has gone through that process before you, because they will be able to give you the best insights on how to approach the case. A lot of schools have huge number of people in consulting. They are smart, but the thing that they do is that they leverage their alumni. So you have to leverage your alumni to be able to just show you the best part to be able to ace those interviews. Because like Wole said, there are a lot of smart people that are in this process. So you really need to stand out. And for you to stand out, you need to have information ahead of time to be able to best prepare yourself to ace those interviews, because you only get one chance most times in those interview processes.
How about you, Wole? Summary, one tip.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything much more to add. It's, one thing, give yourself time to prepare, and preparation is more than just the case interview. It's understanding the firms, it's all the things that Chioma mentioned. So give yourself the time to go through that process.
Yeah. All right. So as internationals, there's the big elephant in the room, work visa. Do your companies sponsor? That's one. Would you advise international students to do in order to, I mean, keeping in mind that there's that barrier for as international students. So what worked for you? What would you recommend for current international students or aspiring international students?
I can talk first. Yeah, I can talk first to this one as well.
Yeah.
I think there are a ton of online resources that tell you what companies have sponsored in the past, and you can always leverage those so that when you're applying, you're applying to companies that you know would sponsor or are open to sponsoring. And as Choma mentioned, as you go through the process and you're connecting with people who are working in those companies, it's one of the questions you should naturally ask if you're somebody who would need work authorization, right? Does your company sponsor before I even start this process of preparing for interviews with you? And for me, Bain did sponsor, as well as several other firms that were coming to Carnegie Mellon to recruit as well. And so I sort of had my focus on, what company sponsor. I'm an international student. I don't have work authorization in the US. And that's the first step. In terms of the sponsorship process itself, there really isn't anything that I'll say I did personally in that process. These big firms have like legal teams that are responsible for applying for whether it be H-1B or any other sort of visa to ensure that you get that work authorization. And so there's really no advice on that front. The one additional thing I'll add on this is with many programs in the US today, there is I'm trying to remember what they call this thing, OPT, which is your optional practical training that gets you 1 year of work experience, or maybe 2 years if you're in a STEM program. A STEM program is one that is science, technology, and maybe math based,
Engineering and math.
engineering and math, exactly, and math based. You get 2 years of OPT, and so even if you don't necessarily get through the work authorization process, it still gives you the opportunity to get 1 year of experience under your belt within that firm or within the US. But in terms of like personal things to do, I can't give any advice because there's nothing I did. It's make sure that you're targeting a company who's going to sponsor. If you get into a company who's going to sponsor, they will handle it from their own legal side, and that's all you need to know about that process. One additional thing that I think I was sharing with you, Moyo and Yewande, just before we started off the call, is I've heard about people going through a personal route, applying for a permanent residency while they are still in school in the US or right after they finish school in the US. I haven't gone through that process and I can't speak to that, but it's one of the options that I've heard people sort of go through as well.
Thank you, Wale. Is there anything that you like to add, Chioma?
Yes. Just going back to what Wole was talking about, the OPT, I would advise that if you're an incoming student, to be honest, because of the current immigration climate, you should try and target a school that will give you a STEM OPT, which is a 3-year work visa. Because I know that some consulting firms will take people that have 3 years work visa versus a 1-year work visa. And another thing that I would say is when you're networking, those are the questions you have to ask, because even within firms, for some particular departments, they will take international students while others would not. So you really need to really dig deep to see if those companies or firms that you're applying to and the department specific are going to be hiring. More likely than not, they will be hiring for more specialty positions or management consulting. They will be sponsoring H-1B visas. And yeah, so the other part that Wole was talking about, applying for permanent residency, I would say if you have a degree that is like science or math based, you have the higher probability of getting those permanent visa, like it's a special interest visa or something like that. So you can also look through that route too. But the last advice I would give is consulting is competitive, it's competitive for domestic students as well as international students. So the reality is not a lot of people that apply to consulting get into consulting. So if you're looking at getting into consulting, I would advise that you also recruit for another industry, because the probability of getting in is very slim, because both internationals and domestic want to get into consulting. So that's just the reality of things. So I would say balance it, recruit for consulting and also recruit for another industry too.
That's great. Yewande, is there anything that you like to add on that front?
No, I think I think you guys pretty much talked about it. If the options really are OPT, H1B, and if you want to go the personal route, you could apply for your permanent residency on your own. You do have to demonstrate that your presence is of national interest to the United States. So you have to put together a case. You need to get references from people you've worked with in the past. So that's a very involved process, but it definitely is another route that you could go. But I really don't have much to add on that. It's immigration, so it is what it is with that.
Yeah, is what it is. All right, cool. I do want to take one question from the chat group because I think it's important. How can you make your resume more competitive for consulting? Do you need certifications? Are there things that you would advise people to put on their resume? Wole?
Okay. I don't want to give just the it depends answer because there's an it depends answer, right? And we've talked about this multiple times. The perspective I come from is a general management consulting perspective, and it all depends on what firm you're applying to, right? If you're applying to a tech consulting firm, you want to show that you have tech skills. If you're applying to a financial services consulting arm of a consulting firm, you want to make sure that you're showing that you have those skills as well. But I'll say generally speaking, there are three things that every consulting firm is looking for in addition to or as a base on which you build off of. One is you can solve problems and you have a results first orientation as you solve problems. So what problems have you solved that have led to results being achieved? Two is you can work in teams. Like Chioma mentioned, you're always going to be with a team. It's never a single player game in consulting. It's always a team game. Like, you're working with a team, you're working with one other person, you're reporting to somebody, you're leading somebody, you're working with a client arm in arm. It's always a team game you're playing. And so you want to show that you've worked in a team context and you've been successful in a team context. And the third piece is sort of a mix of client skill slash communication skill slash leadership skill to show that you've been in tough situations and you've handled yourself really well. And so when you look through your resume and through your experiences, you need to paint your experiences in those three lights. In what ways have I demonstrated that I can solve a problem that is really tough, that is really difficult, and I can do that with a results first orientation? In what ways have I shown that I've worked well with teams, either leading those teams or being part of a team and having an impact on that team? And in what ways have I showed that I've engaged with clients before in the past, or I've presented to senior leadership of a group before in the past, to show that I have the communication skills and the gravitas to engage there. And then on top of that is then everything else that is specific to that particular industry or that particular consulting firm is, do I need to show that I have tech skills? Do I need to show that I have a certification, for example? For Bain, for example, we don't care about your certifications. Like, certification or not, like, we don't care because it's generalist consulting. And the idea is you build the skills you need in specific industries as you go through those industries. For some other firms, I know, you need to show those technical skills. And that's where sort of learning what each firm needs is critical on top of the three things that are at the base.
Awesome. Chioma, anything else that you'd like to add?
I think Wole pretty much covered it, but since I'm more of an industry specialist, we look out for just the experience that you have that can be transferable to what we are doing here. I mean, we know that people would definitely not have all the knowledge, but we are looking at people that have that base of the financial services industry understanding that will be able to transfer to what we are looking for. Then specific for school, I know that, I mean, things may have changed, but I graduated last year. I know that a lot of these top consulting firms also look at your GMAT. So I knew a lot of my classmates actually rewrote the GMAT because they were wanted to apply to these companies. So people have it on their resumes. It just shows that you have more technical competence, especially if you don't have the direct number of years or experience that they're directly looking at. You know that, okay, you have technical competence, and then you're able to, something else that is also specific to US. I don't know if we do it in Nigeria that much, but when you're crafting your resume, you have to be able to craft it in terms of metrics. So all the things that Wole was talking about, like if you did a project, what was the end result? Were you able to give a cost savings of 1 million, or were you able to improve a process by 5%? So they really want to see like metrics that you have, they can use to measure and judge you, your technical competence, as well as your team leadership or membership skills too.
So I'll
Thank you
chime
for
in on
that
this
context.
I'll
Go
chime
ahead.
in on this one from a technology perspective. So I didn't in my space, we don't have to display like MBA scores or anything, GMAT scores or anything. I didn't even write the GMAT. I wrote the GRE, but that's not required for, that's not required, period. But really, what really counts is, what area of technology do you specialize in? So with that question, when you say, how can I make do I need certifications for the consulting industry? You have to understand that consulting industry is broad. Now, if you wanted to come into technology consulting, technology is broad. So what is your area of concentration and what is your area of interest? If you are in data science, for instance, are there specific certifications in that field? I don't know that there are a lot. I think it's usually more of like your technical competency. So how do you demonstrate that on your resume? So using data science example, do you have projects that you've worked on before? Do you have a repository of or something that someone who's looking at your resume can go look at your work? So repository of your work essentially. Certifications it depends on what field of technology you're in. So I'm in the field of technology, I'm in enterprise systems, and it's very certifications based. So coming in as a campus recruit, it might not really count if you have certifications because they're going to train you. Now, as an experienced hire, you would be required to have some sort of certifications that can demonstrate your proficiency and skill sets in that area. So to answer that question in a nutshell, from a technology consulting perspective, I would say identify your area of concentration or your area of specialty or area of specialization. And in that area, look to see what certifications, demonstrates that you are proficient. And then you could look to getting those certifications if you do not have them already. And if it's an area that certifications don't really count, then you need to be able to say, like Chioma and Wole have said, you need to be able to demonstrate demonstrate results on your resume and demonstrate your experience in a way that speaks for what you've done without anybody talking to you.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think another thing that I'll say here, and I think Chioma, you touched on it, are your grades. So some of these companies, they have a cutoff of what your GPA should be. And if you don't even get above that, they might not entertain your resume at all. So if you're still in school, pay attention to your grades and keep them at a certain level to, give yourself the opportunity to even apply to these companies. Talk less of doing interview there. So with that, I think we've come to the end of the session on getting into consulting. I'm going to hand this over to Yewande as we talk about the experience in consulting when you get in.
Yeah. All right. So this section is talking more of your experience in consulting, and I think this is where people get a better sense of what you do on your day-to-day and can kind of make that decision. Because personally, I think a lot of people think consulting is glamorous versus do you really know what it entails to be a consultant? So I'll kick off with if you, Wole or Chioma, if you want to walk us through like what's a typical day in your life as a consultant, what does that look like for you?
I could go first. So I would say that a typical day on a client project, I spend at least 70% of my time in meetings. So we are always meeting with different stakeholders to be able to just gather their insights or be able to really understand what the problems are or to show what we are thinking in terms of what the issues that they are facing is. We are meeting with them to be able to gather like business requirements that they need to be written for developers. So it's a lot of meetings, like 70%. I mean, we are meeting with different stakeholders, just trying to understand their problem and trying to show them what we are thinking and things like that. The remaining 30%, I would say, is at the end of the day, typically, at the end of the normal day, that's when your work begins, because then you have to sit down and do some analysis, do presentations, or gather the information together to be able to give an output to your clients. And it involves a lot of research too, because what our clients are really looking to us for is insights into what their competitors are doing. Because I mean, every other thing they can get from the internet, but they really want insight on what competitors are doing. So it involves a lot of research, and you have to do a lot of analysis. You have to reach out to internal stakeholders in case the project you're doing is something that you don't really have a lot of knowledge in, and then you reach out to them to get understanding. What I would say is you have to be comfortable with ambiguity. It's not, that's people that are very flexible and structured, because a lot of things you're going to meet them for the very first time, but you still have to be able to present yourself in a way that gives the client confidence that you're going to be able to solve whatever issues that they're bringing to you. So it's 70% meetings with stakeholders, and then 30% doing analysis and presentations and business requirement writings and things of that nature, depending on the type of project it is. And then, of course, you still have to also do internal work. You have to do internal initiatives. You have to help put together proposals to sell new work, because that's the only way that promoted. So you have to, you're working on the client side, but you also still have to keep being relevant in the internal part of things, working on point of views, doing research to put out white papers on the internet, and just working on proposals and thinking of new ideas or new business ideas that can help the department to get more inflow, cash inflow. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So thanks for that perspective, Chioma. Well, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say the short answer to that question is it depends. And I'll say there are probably three dimensions on which, your sort of typical day changes based off of. One is the kind of work you're doing. There's work that maybe is typically engaged with the client more, and there's work that is maybe a bit more distant from the client. Two is sort of where you are in the hierarchy as well. The more senior you are, the less you're in the weeds of the analytics on the day to day, and the more you are like communicating with clients and communicating answers and insights from your team. And then the third I'll say is sort of the client dynamics as well, right? The kind of client you're working with. With some clients, they expect you to be there with them in person every day. And some other clients, it's more of a, just give us your expertise and tell us what you know about the industry and about what competitors are doing, like Chioma said. So based off of those three things, I can tell you, how my typical day had been, 2 years on a project that I worked in the retail industry that was focused on operating model and how they structure their stores. I can tell you about a more recent case where I'm working with a car insurance firm that is looking to sell more car insurance in the US, and is looking to also help them understand sort of the mindset of the customer and how they can sell more to those customers. Again, all depends. But what Chioma said is the typical thing. You're always solving problems. You're always engaging with clients, even as those things vary based on the three dimensions that I mentioned.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. Thanks for that perspective. I wanted to chime in or add in on something that Chioma said. I don't know if this is a thing at your firm, but I know that for the Big Four consulting firms, there is an expectation that in addition to client work, you also work on things that help to grow the firm or help to develop the firm. So they're called practice development initiatives. So you have to kind of factor that into your day as well. So on top of all the different meetings you have, client meetings you have, you'll be expected to at some point be working on an internal initiative, and you might have meetings for that. You might actually have to work on a plan for that, or working on proposals, or working on, like Chioma said, white papers. So that kind of adds to your activities for the day. And in some cases, you might have to work overtime to kind of do that work as well. So
That's the one a lot of cases.
Interesting diversion is my next question, because I was going to ask, on average, what do your hours look like? Depending on, I know, well, this is another it depends question, and I know it would also depend on your clients, and it would depend on your industry. But if you give us a sense of what your hours look like before COVID, and then now that you're working in the COVID pandemic situation where we're 100% remote.
I'll say right now, for me, on average, my day is probably a 12-hour day. Typically, I try to get ahead of the team, so I wake up typically really early to sort of think about the answer and spend time just reflecting myself before even our clients. Because Chioma mentioned that there's always 70% of your typical workday, which is like 9 to 4, will probably be filled with meetings. And so I carve out that time early in the morning to just think about what the answer is to some of the most critical questions that my client is facing. I'll say I try to, take time off to do lunch, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. I think more so now that I'm working from home, it's time for me to just like hang out with my kids, talk to my wife as well, and spend time with my family during the workday. Sometimes when I'm at the client, it's a working lunch for me. It's, I'm chewing on something and reading something, or sort of, having a meeting that is a lunch meeting. And then I try my best to end my day by 6:30, 7 p.m. every day. There'll be some days where there is additional stuff to do after dinner. And in the non-COVID world, I'll typically have dinner with my team when we're traveling. So have dinner with the team, spend 45 minutes just catching up on their personal lives as well. And then I might spend maybe an additional 30 minutes just rounding up something when I get back to the hotel, in the hotel case. But now that I work from home, I almost, most times I try to end my day about like 6:30, 7 p.m. ish.
Okay.
But again, it depends. Is the overall answer? I'm just
Let's
giving you
answer.
a flavor of what a typical day could look like for me.
Yeah. I would just echo what Wole says. It just depends. So I've only been on one project for the entirety of my career with EY, and the company was pretty chilled. So I was doing like a 9-hour day, but I do have colleagues that are in the New York office and they're working on projects for 10, 12 hours. So it just depends on what clients, who the client is and what the deadline looks like. So for me, I would say typical day for me, because right now I'm not on a project, is 8 hours, but on a normal client project, I say on average 9 to 10 hours a day, but I incorporate lunch into it because you need time for yourself. So even if it's, I try to take 30 minutes in my day to just, have lunch and start the day early, get prepared for meetings, so that when we have those conversations, I'm coming in with something that is of value to the clients.
Right. To add in from a technology perspective, because we work in technology, a lot of our team who does core development is offshore, they're not in the US. So sometimes that could involve, at least from technology consulting, sometimes you have to work odd hours. And odd hours mean that sometimes you have to wake up really early to talk to your team who might be in India or some other foreign country because of the time zone differences. Or you have to stay up really late to talk to your team and do kind of a handoff for the day and pass on the information. So I would say again, like what you said, it really depends. But for me, on average, I'm working on a good day, I'm working 10 hours. On a really bad day, I could be working. If it's a really, really, really bad time, I could be working as much. I've gone working as much as 14, 15 hours, which is not healthy, but it depends on the time of the project. And again, it's not something to be proud of. It just depends on your client, depends on the time and season you're in that project at any given point in time. I would also say that also when you're traveling when you're at the client side, so you're traveling, you're away from home. So a lot of times you'd go out for dinners with your team. Now, this can also be considered as still working because you're not free. It's sort of a networking dinner. So I would also add that to my time at work because it's not time I'm using to do any of my personal things. So I would say really if you're factoring that time in where you're gone, you're at the client side at 9 o'clock, and then you leave for dinner at 7:30, and then you get back to your hotel at 10, still do some work. That's a full day of work right there. So again, it depends. But I would say for me, I'm working anywhere from 10 to 12 hours.
Yeah,
On a Friday, maybe 9 hours.
not to scare people. I have
Mm,
8-hour days as well sometimes, and I sometimes
Yeah.
have 7-hour days as well. So like,
it
the
depends.
answer is like you guys said, it's ebb and flows based on where you're at with the client or based on where you're at with the work. So don't get too bothered about the
Yeah.
number of hours you're hearing.
Mm-hmm.
It's all ultimately most times sustainable.
Yeah. And just something to chime in here as someone that transitioned from consulting into the industry or tech industry, it's not better anywhere, to be honest with you. There's work to be done everywhere. It depends on what you're working on, what project you're working on, what your deliverables are, and the timeline as well. So it really all depends. I think it's really just an American culture thing. They work a lot over here, so you need to be ready to work, regardless of the industry that you're going into. But something that I think you guys did not touch on is the odd travel that you have to do. Like I had a manager when I was in consulting that flew every week from the West Coast to the Midwest, and she had to take the red eye every single week and still be at the client site on Monday morning at 9 a.m. So I think that's something that you guys are not touching as well. The traveling and the requirements, the physical requirements is significant. And I think that's what makes the consulting industry very different.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to that is I haven't traveled because where I am, we have a lot of clients here. So I was very intentional about staying here because I didn't want to travel so much. But you're right, you definitely have to incorporate that because I have colleagues that are flying in from New York and from Charlotte Mondays to Thursdays, and I know it takes a toll on people. I know the perks are they get free lunch, breakfast, dinner, and hotels, but after a while they complain and just time away from family. So that is something to be considerate about if you decide if you want to come into consulting. And I mean, you can be strategic, and after a while you can speak to your manager. I mean, nothing is written in. So if you prefer to just stay in a location, so far they have enough clients to serve for you to. If they have enough clients in that location, you can probably not even travel at all. So it's something that you can have a conversation with your managers on to if you don't want to do that travel part of it.
Alrighty, all great, great points so far. So I'm going to pivot to the next question, and it'll be from both of you. Can either of you share at least your experience so far, one pro, an advantage or a pro and con of working in the consulting industry based off of your experience? I'm not sure who wants to go first, but maybe Wally.
Yeah, sure. I can go first on this one. I'll say, frankly speaking, I evaluate sort of my career path and what I'm trying to get out of my career I'll say probably every year, and I sort of have a 2-year plan for my career each time that I do that evaluation. So far, in terms of the impact I'm trying to have, the learning that I'm trying to get that would accelerate me for my longer term career, I'll say consulting has provided all that for me on both of those fronts. And that's what gives me energy. That's what gives me joy from like being at work and doing work. So on those two fronts, it's been great. The one thing that two things that I think about all the time when I consider sort of where to go to next is one, I've always been interested in working with slightly smaller firms. I started off my experience working with a startup in Nigeria, and I sort of still have that affinity for helping startups to grow and accelerate and seeing that them blossom. And so each time that I think about the sort of companies I'm working with an $80 billion company right now, helping them with their customer experience. But I think about like the smaller companies where I can be having an impact that is 5 times in terms of relative terms, probably the same, sorry, in terms of relative terms, probably 5 times more with the smaller firms. In terms of absolute terms, of course, if you're working with an $80 billion company and you increase their bottom line by, you know, 0.2%, it's going to be way more than what you do for a startup. So it's one of the things that I consider all the time. And then the second thing, like, we've talked about is the number of hours that I work, and ultimately the travel component, like Moyo mentioned, being away from family every now and again. I have 2 boys now; they're still really young, so it's the two things that I think about all the time. When I weigh the pros and the cons, it's why I've been in consulting for the last 4 years. The pros always outweigh the cons, and I'm enjoying myself as much as I can right now. But I'll do that evolution again in the next year or so. And if I start to see the cons sort of outweigh the pros, that will be a signal for me that it's time for me to switch. But for now, it's been a great experience so far.
All right, thanks. Anything to add to that, Chioma?
Yes, I actually did a list and I have 3 pros and 1 con. So the pros outweigh the con. And I think the con is the work-life balance. I mean, when you start having a family, I don't have a family yet, but when you start having a family or want to consider that, is the time how to be able to balance the work and home life, which is important for a lot of people in the consulting world. In terms of the pros, I would say the learning curve is high. Like I have learned so much in my less than 1 year here versus my 3-4 years in industry prior to this. You're constantly learning things, you're hearing new terms, and you're learning a lot in the field. So that's a proof for me because that's part of what I wanted to, one of the reasons why I went into consulting. I want to be in a place where I feel like I'm not the smartest person in the room, where I'm learning from a lot of people, like figuratively, it's a reality. And another thing that I would say is a lot of soft skills, right? So I've had opportunity to talk to like senior leadership, present, do things that are soft skills, work on proposals. I feel like I'm an entrepreneur. I'm in charge of my career. I am getting a lot of skills that I would possibly use if I want to go into a leadership role in a smaller firm down the line. So which is very important for me. If it was industry where you probably would do things assigned to your specific level, here you have the opportunity. There are a lot of opportunities around, and you're able to decide what makes sense for you versus what doesn't. And then the last one I would say is, I mean, there are a lot of transferable skills, right? Like if you want to exit consulting to something else, I mean, you don't necessarily have to go back to the specific industry you worked with if you're a specialist, because there are a lot of transferable skills like managing projects. You're able to do presentation analysis, research, do a lot of communication things. So there are a lot of transferable skills down the line if you decide to leave consulting. So those are the 3 pros for me.
One quick thing to add that I forgot to add is compensation as well. You typically get well compensated as well, so it's definitely a pro, and there's no discounting that. It's one of the things that it doesn't play top of my mind, but it's one of the things at the back of my mind as I make that evaluation of should I continue to be here or should I transition out as well.
All right, sounds good. The only, in addition to what you guys invited, I'd say consulting is it's compensation, not just like monetary terms. It's you get other perks as well, which you kind of touched on. You get the hotels, you get the travel, which if you're into that type of thing, if you're into traveling weekly, those are really good benefits. I think that's why a lot of people, or that's one of the perks for a lot of people when getting into industry. The con for me, one other con I would mention is, it's very networking and relationship based. So if you're more of an introvert, or if you're shy, or if you're someone who doesn't really like to talk to people, then you will struggle in consulting, because everything from how you interact with your teams, with your clients, how you advance in the firm, how you get your next project, everything is based on networking. You have to show up. Your partners have to know you, your team members, they all have to know you, your client has to know you. All of these are what counts for you, in terms of performance. So if you are a hard worker who does your job well, but you're not a good speaker, or you don't really do well with relationships, then you will struggle, which a lot of people who are introverts really struggle with balancing that. So that's another thing to factor in with your decision. Now I'll take one question from the chat, because it was a question I had. What are some exit opportunities you see in your areas within consulting? What do you think, what would be a good exit opportunity for you in your areas? And Wole, you can go
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, happy to take the first pass at that as well. Right now, I don't feel like there's anything that isn't technical based that I want to do that I can't go do right now, which is one of the great things about consulting, right? I've spent time, like I mentioned, in a variety of industries. I've done retail, I've worked with a CPG firm, I've worked with a bank, I've worked with insurance firms the last 2 years, and I've sort of gotten a bit more specialized as I've gotten more senior at Bain. But there's nothing in terms of on the business front that I think if I really wanted to do. When I think about even the options that I get when I get LinkedIn requests from recruiters or messages from recruiters, it's a wide variety of things. It's leading strategy teams. It's working with a PE firm to help them evaluate sort of investments they're about to make. It's working with tech companies as a chief of staff to a CEO, for example, to help him with strategic projects. It's if I wanted to do HR, I can probably do HR because I've worked operating model in the past as well. So it's I think it's wide open on that front, especially for me at Bain, where I've sort of been a generalist and I've worked across multiple industries and I've worked across multiple functions. But in terms of things that I'll probably be limited in doing will be things that are very technical based. If it's engineering based management that is requiring technical expertise, then I'm probably not going to be great at that because I haven't built any technical, like deep technical expertise in any industry in the last 4 years.
Okay, what about you, Chioma?
Yeah, I would say that typically for a lot of my colleagues that leave consulting, they typically go back to industry. They go back to work for wealth and asset management companies on the senior level management side to help handle their strategic projects. On that exit opportunity, I can see we also can pivot to technology type of companies, because even though we work with wealth and asset management companies, what we do is on the day-to-day is actually we work on technology type of projects. Like we're helping clients try to figure out implementations, integrations when they do mergers and acquisitions, so things of that sort. So like I said before, there are a lot of transferable skills. So I think it just depends on how you're able to tailor what you want to do to your next opportunity. But there are a lot of opportunities out there when you want to leave consulting.
All right, thank you. So to address the specific question in the chat, it sounds like there are more career paths outside of strategy, because the question was, aren't the exit career paths primarily in strategy? So it sounds like, first of all, it depends on what area you work in, but definitely you can do more beyond just strategy. It just depends on what you worked on, the industries you worked in, because with each industry you gain expertise. So you could go on to work in those industries. Well, it looks like you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to say everything in business is strategy, right? Like product strategy, human resource strategy. Everything is essentially strategy is the set of actions that will allow you to win in the market. So it could be in any function, essentially. So, yep, most people prefer strategy-related roles, but strategy-related roles are also wide in terms of what functions they're focused on. So it's a wide variety of things you could definitely get into outside of consulting.
Yeah, and one thing I will also add to that is I know a lot of people that have left roles within consulting to to industry, what you can also do is you can get specific certifications that those roles require in the industry. That would also make you more marketable if you want to go the more technical routes. So getting specifics like cloud, AWS, when people want to go into those sort of areas, you can just get those certifications so that it helps to build your resume, that you don't only have business expertise, but also the technical expertise to back up the role.
Okay. Thank you, Wole and Chioma. Moyo, were you going to add in on this one as well?
Oh, yeah, sure. So for me, exiting out of consulting, I moved on to a tech company, but I do not work in what I'll consider a technical role. Like I don't code or do anything like that. But I think the thing that consulting gives you an edge on is the problem solving. Every business needs people that can think, that can solve problems, and consulting is a good way to develop that skill and be able to show that, yes, I was able to function in consulting, I can solve big problems. And when you get to the interview for those companies as well, you are showing those skills that you learned in consulting. So I think that's why consulting is a good place to start your career. It really gives you the structure and the foundation that you need to move on to other career paths, because you are developing skills that every business needs. That's the only thing I'll just add on to that.
Thank you. So before I start taking questions from the chat, I'm going to ask one final question. So we're in a COVID world, we have a new normal. We don't know when COVID will be over, but what impacts do you see that COVID has had on the consulting industry and in the spaces where you work, and how do you think that would inform work processes or industry processes going forward? So Chioma.
Yeah, so I will start with the number one that everyone can see, the travel. So a lot of what COVID has done is make us as a firm to rethink this whole travel thing. So I foresee that post-COVID we'll travel less, but it just depends on the client. Some clients prefer to see you every week to know that you're working, but in a general this thing, I would say travel is one. Another thing is post-COVID, I think the types of projects that we're working on is changing a bit. So just specific to what's my own industry. So before this COVID, we're all doing like technology, digitalization, implementation of technology tools for clients and everything. But now that this whole COVID is coming through, a lot of what we are hearing from our clients is they want us to do product strategy. They want us to assess their suite of products. They want to do like their organizational strategy. They want to understand how they can succeed going forward. So it has gone more from the implementation side of things, which is what we were mostly focused on before, to do more on strategy. So I think going forward, and also, for example, cost transformation, a lot of people are saying, okay, we need you to come in and look at our departments to see where we can cut costs and things of that nature. So I think going forward, that is going to be a theme, at least for the next 1 or 2 years. So that is, we're doing more strategy versus implementation right now.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing to add from my end on that. It's spot on. Travel is probably going to change, and it's changing already. And the type of projects you'd work on will be different, because a lot of people are looking for COVID lens sort of projects right now to help them through this period. Nothing additional to add.
Alrighty. So thank you also, thank you, Wole and Chioma, so much for the insights that you provided so far. I'm going to start taking questions from the chat. And there's a question here from Shokwe. Shokwe says, do you think the consulting industry is too saturated with the McKinsey's being a company in Boston Consulting Group? So what are your thoughts on that? Would you say consulting is saturated, and do you think there are opportunities for people to get into those industries?
Yeah, it's not saturated. I mean, even we had a call last week with our group leadership, and they said even though there's a hiring freeze on the company as a whole, we wanted to get more people in because we're getting more projects. So I think I would never say that the industry is saturated. It's just very competitive. But if you bring the right skill set and the right experience to the table, you definitely would get in. I don't think it's saturated at all.
Okay. Wole, do you have anything to add to that before I move on to the next question?
100% agree.
Okay. Yep. All right. There's a question here from Tolu Anime. She asked, what schools are target schools for Bain and Company?
It's probably on the website.
Okay.
And it differs a bit by the Bain office as well. Is the other thing I'll say. In the Lagos office, for example, we don't have the target school is not a school in the US, right?
Right.
And in Mexico, the target school is not a school necessarily. So it all differs by office. In the Chicago office, it's the for business school applicants, it's the typical candidates you'd find in the sort of top 10 business schools in the US, the Harvard, Stanford's, XYZ. But you can go on the website and find for that particular office what the target schools are for each one of our offices.
Yeah, okay. And I'll add to that. I don't know if in Bain recruiting is centralized, but in EY, recruiting is decentralized. So what that means is that target schools differ according to the departments, right? So for example, UT Austin can be a target target school for my department, but for another department is not. So you have to also look at the different companies. It depends on the types of companies that you're going to. Some of them have different, recruiting is decentralized. So what works for one department may not work for another one. So it's just based on the experience and the relationship that the school had built with the company beforehand. So that's also something to take into consideration too when talking about target schools.
Yep. So I'm totally, I mean, long and short is, depending on the school, the website, the company you're trying to apply to, on their website and the careers page, at least for Deloitte, I know that they would usually say the schools. So that beside each job role, there's a school there. So you know that these are the schools they're going to. And then if you're in the US, your career services, you should be able to have a list of the companies that come to you, recruit from your school. So it just depends on the company, it depends on the location of your school, it depends on your location. So I wouldn't say that there's a specific way to know what target schools they are for each company.
Just something I'll add on to that very quickly is, so if you plan to get into consulting and maybe you're looking at schools now, maybe MBA programs, that's something to keep in mind. So if you're targeting specific consulting companies, make sure that when you reach out to the school, you're asking those questions. And also target schools change from year to year. So one year you might be in a school and being a company is recruiting from that school. And then the next year, by the time you're graduating, they're no longer recruiting. So, I mean, don't focus on that. Focus on building your profile and obviously be proactive and look to confirm that your school is actually a target school before going there.
Okay, thanks for adding on to that. There's another question here about job websites. So I believe we've touched on that a lot in our session. The question is, what job websites would you recommend for finding the jobs? From my experience, I've seen if the company doesn't come to recruit at your school, so if your school is not a target school, I would say directly go on the company's websites and see if they have any positions that are available. The other thing that Chioma had mentioned earlier in the session is you could meet, if your school is not a target school, you could meet some of these companies at recruiting events or at conferences. So like the National Black MBA, National Black Accountants, National Society of Black Engineers. There's certain conferences that these companies go to. So it's just a matter of knowing what conferences to target depending on your background in the industry. If you're an accountant or if you had an industry experiences in accounting, that you might be interested in going for the National Black Accounting Conference. And on for each conference or each organization, on their website, they always have a list of companies that are coming. So you could always use that to identify and target certain companies. If consulting companies are on your target list, then you could look at those conferences websites to see if those companies will be coming. But I wouldn't say there are any specific job websites in general.
Yeah.
So
and I just want to add to that point about conferences that Yewande brought up. So I know you may hear something like National Black Accountants or Engineers, and you'll be like, I'm not an accountant or I'm not an engineer. I would say still go to those conferences, because even though they don't have the jobs that you're looking for, I know someone that has gotten a strategic job from an engineering conference, because she went and she spoke to the recruiter, and the recruiter was impressed, and the recruiter told her that even though I'm not recruiting for this job, I will definitely pass on your resume to the department that is in charge of this, and that's how she got the job. So just go, because the more you build your network, just be very intentional about the companies. That's what I would say. Look more at the companies, not generally the type of job, because a lot of these conferences may not have the specific jobs that you're looking for, but just building that connection. And these recruiters, they all exchange they exchange resumes with each other within the firm. So yeah.
All right, great. So moving on to the next question. There's a question here that says, what is the average salary for an entry-level job in the consulting industry from your experience? Do you guys have any idea?
Entry level.
Entry level. It depends on a lot of things.
It depends. That's a HR question.
Yeah.
It depends on the company too. Depends on the
Yeah.
role.
The good thing
Yeah.
is that I think the glass doors of the world usually have sort of salaries, and so if you go on
Mm-hmm.
online, you can always Google things like that and find information
Mm-hmm.
that you need for specific
Mm-hmm.
industries, for specific companies, for specific roles. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just off the top of my head, I think entry level is, I think it's between 60 to 75 to even 90 to 100, depending on the company and the location. So yeah,
It
I think
depends on.
right around
Depends on
60.
the role.
It
Mm-hmm.
depends on
Oh,
the role, depends on the location, depends on a lot
okay.
of things.
Mm-hmm. Depends on your degree.
Yeah, it depends on your
Yeah.
degree, depends on the
Okay.
experience that you're coming in with. There's actually a site that I stumbled on very recently. It actually gives you the exact salary for each role. It's
Mm-hmm.
an H1B site, so you can go on the for the company and then look at for everybody that they filed H1B for that year, what was the salary for those people. So they do get that specific on that website. I don't remember the name, but I'll probably put it in the description of this video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Glassdoor is a very, very good resource, for identifying roles and identifying their salaries. So look up glassdoor.com. All right, moving on to the next question from Banji. He says, what position is the best, or it sounds like he's asking, at what point is the best to get into consulting, pre-MBA or post-MBA, based on your experience? That's a tricky question. But can either of you speak to that?
Neither.
No.
It's the same. Yeah. We
Mm-hmm.
at Bain we hired tons of people at the undergrad level, and we hired tons of
Mm-hmm.
people at the MBA level as well. So yeah, it all depends on where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
Apply, make sure you've packaged your resume, your experiences the right way, and
Mm-hmm.
either one works fine.
All right. Chioma, it looks like you were thinking. Do you want to add anything
Yeah,
to
I
that?
was actually thinking, because in advantage, I would say if you get in pre-consulting, you're able to build your network. Because I know that people, I'm here in, I've been 1 year or less in EY, but people that have started before, like from undergrad, they have a wider network. And so I would say if you have the opportunity to get in pre-consulting, it's never a bad idea to do that, because it just makes you more marketable. They will definitely want to take someone that has had experiences before consulting and before MBA. And then I think you move to the next level when you get in,
Mm-hmm.
you finish your MBA program. Yeah, but there's no advantage, but I would say if you have the opportunity to get in pre-MBA, you should grab it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now there's another question about lawyers. So, what are the options for lawyers in the consulting industry? So, in your experience, have you worked with anyone with a legal background, or do you see any opportunity for lawyers in your where you work in consulting?
Yeah, Bain is specifically unique in this area. Like my
Mm-hmm.
starting class at Bain in the Chicago office, we had a guy who'd been a drummer before business school. We had folks who had been teachers before business school. We had somebody who'd worked in an NGO. I think it was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She'd worked in before business school. I had a sort of tech background, even though I was doing uh, strategy in a tech company.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a
Mm-hmm.
wide variety of experiences. And if you're a lawyer, it doesn't like that doesn't then exclude you because you're a lawyer, not a teacher. So it's like it's any background you have, as long as you can demonstrate those things that I mentioned: problem solving, you work well in teams, you have a result orientation, and you sort of have the leadership and client skills to work in the environment. Like that's all we're really looking for. And the one thing that I think Chioma has mentioned a couple of times is the GMAT score, which is somewhat critical on the resume. And the reason it's critical is it just shows that you sort of have a base level problem solving ability. Like that's the goal of the GMAT score. And for us, it's one of the sort of levelers as well to say, does this person have the ability to work in an environment where they're solving problems every day? And that's just sort of a grounding in that regard. But yeah, it's any industry, any experience you have, it all works at Bain.
All right.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add to what Wallace has said is if the lawyer is trying to get in without doing the business school route, I do know that lawyers are a lot in mergers and acquisition groups because they really do the whole legal term. So I think merger and M&A groups, transaction advisory groups really leverage lawyers more than other parties in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like he said, if you go to business school, you can pretty much pivot into whatever department or group that you want. That's the beauty of school. You can rewrite your story whichever way you want to be able to get into the particular industry or area that you're looking for.
Right. And just to add on to that, I would say if you're a lawyer and you're looking to get into consulting, go on the company's website, depending on what area of law you practice or what role you function in. Go on the website, look at their industries that they work with, look at their practices, and then look at the careers page and see if you can find anything that's in line with what you do. And then the next logical step would be before you apply, go on LinkedIn and see if you can find anyone in that role. You can reach out to them and talk to them and get a sense of what they do and if it's in line with what you're looking to do. So another question before we open up for questions for anyone who wants to ask their questions. A question here says, how relevant is the CFA charter to someone who wants to specialize in financial services consulting? I think Chioma, that might be more for you.
Yeah. So the CFA is not that relevant. Like if you have an MBA or a graduate degree, I think it covers for the CFA. So you don't necessarily have to do the CFA because of financial services. Well, I don't know, it may be different for people in M&A, but I think it just shows that you're more committed. It's not a minus if you don't have it. That's what I would say. So CFA certifications, like Wole had said, is not that relevant. It depends on the group or the department. Yeah.
Alrighty, one more question, and we've kind of answered this, but another variation to it. Banji says, do you have to do GMAT to get into consulting? What about the GRE? I know Wole and Chioma have said multiple times that we do need the GMAT. Now, is the GRE accepted in instead of the GMAT in terms of like getting into management consulting? I know it's not required for technology consulting, but
yeah, not.
It's not GRE is not accepted, or
so for my position, I did not need to submit either GMAT or GRE.
Okay,
but I do know for BCG and the rest, they prefer GMAT because I had the recruiter from BCG and she said they prefer GMAT. I don't know if times have changed because this was like back, but I think for Big Four in general, so that's PwC, EY, Deloitte, and KPMG, I don't think they really care about GMAT or GREs because I think that's more for the AT Canon, BCG, Bain, McKinsey type companies. Okay. So, Wole,
yeah, that typically two roles. One, the undergrad role. Undergrad role, you don't need a GMAT, right? You're an undergrad. We're not expecting to have a GMAT or a GRE when you're coming out of undergrad, so that doesn't matter at all. On the business school side, we typically use the GMAT and we use the GRE on selective cases. Like I said, the goal is really to just say, does this person have like the base to show that they can solve problems and they've sort of demonstrated some level of problem solving rigor in their life. Sometimes we even discount the GMAT score and say, does this person have like exceptional grades that, show that there might have been an extenuating circumstance in their life where they couldn't, get the GMAT, or they sort of didn't do well on the GMAT, but the grades show that they're really exceptional people. Like that's what we're looking for. Like it doesn't matter how you show it. It could be GMAT. GMAT is just a simple way to show it because it's a leveler. Everybody takes the same GMAT. You can like compare someone who had a 750 GMAT with someone who had a 620 and say in terms of academic rigor, this one is slightly better than this, but there are other ways to show that as well. So don't feel like GMAT is end all be all. Just find a way to show that rigor, and that's what's most critical.
Okay. And someone just asked, what would you say is a good GMAT score? Does it depend? Or
I mean, from my classmates, I didn't do it, but I think a lot of them, the baseline for them was 680. I don't correct me if I'm wrong. I think that was the bench line for them. They were trying to target 680 and above. But what do you think, Wole?
Yeah, it depends. I'll say if you have a score above, like you said, Chioma, 670, 680, you're like, you're relatively okay, fine. Like I said, if you have other ways to show that academic rigor, you can get away with even a 650 GMAT. Like, yeah, this person has been top of their class. The GPA is, really solid. They have a 650. Let's talk to them. Let's find out what happened. And like, oh, yeah, when I was doing GMAT, I had blah, blah, blah in my life. That's fine. So don't anchor on the score. Anchor on, how do I show that I have that rigor? And if it's not through a score, what other means can I use to show that?
All right. Thank you both so much for your valuable points. We only have about 4 minutes to go, but does anyone have any questions to ask the panelists directly? Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. I think we covered all the questions in the chat. So this is like open space for anyone. Please feel free to ask your questions. And if there are no questions, we'll round up, but.
What type of person will enjoy a career in consulting?
Someone who loves tough problems. That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah, if you love tough problems, because the reason why a firm is asking for consultants to come in is because they feel like they can't solve it on their own, or they need that outside expertise to solve it. So if you're one person who doesn't like tough problems, then it just wouldn't work for you, because it's a tough environment. You're working on the toughest issues that a client has, and it's a high pressure environment as well, because the consulting firm only exists because they're able to solve those tough problems. And so the expectation is always really high when you get into consulting. And if you're one person who doesn't like sort of a high pressure, high reward, high impact sort of environment, then don't do consulting.
Yeah, and yeah, just to add to what Wole has said, you should have a certain level of comfort with communicating with different people, because you will have to consult with developers, senior managers, just different types of people. So you have to be very comfortable with communicating. And if you're someone that is an introvert, I would say you have to be very intentional about being able to communicate, because that's something that may be a minus if you're not very vocal, because they want to be able to see and hear what you have to say. So that is something I would say. If you're too much of an introvert, I would advise that you probably look for something else to do.
Chioma, I'm an introvert, by the way. I'm very introverted. But there's, like you said,
introvert.
There's a balance. Yeah, there's a balance ultimately, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm introverted, I get my energy from just being, on my own, sort of like thinking through problems. But there's the balance, because ultimately you need to communicate, and so you need to develop those skills. But by no means, if you feel like you're introverted, like I'm going to go away from this. No, there are things that you can do to sort of find the right balance. Even if you're introverted. And like I said, I'm extremely introverted. I've just, sort of over the last couple of years been a bit more intentional about when I engage, who I engage, and where I can sort of, find the balance between engaging, which takes energy from me, and sort of, going back into my space, which gives me energy. So it's about finding that balance ultimately is what's most critical here.
All right, and to add to that, I would say two things. One first thing is you have to be thick-skinned, because you will work with clients, and you will work with sometimes difficult clients, and who sometimes will say not so nice things to you. So you have to remember that it's work. Don't take it personal. And especially if you're female, sometimes you could get more, sometimes in a sense more emotional than a male would do. But remember again that it's work. It's not personal. You're going to go home. The client is going to go to their house, and everybody will be fine in the end. But you have to be thick-skinned to take whatever it is that comes your way. Another thing is you have to enjoy working in teams. So if some people like to work on their own, they don't want to talk to anybody. But like Wole also mentioned, like consulting is very, very team-based. So most of your work you can't do it alone. You're all working together in a team to achieve the goal for the client. So if you really don't enjoy working in teams, then it's something that you would also struggle with. So
just one thing I'll add on to that is you also need to be comfortable with not having all the answers. And like you mentioned earlier, Chioma, and ambiguity, in the sense that when they call you in to solve a problem, they don't even have the information on what they're trying to solve as well. So you need to be able to like decipher through the weeds what they're trying to get at, and be comfortable with not having all the answers. And it's a difficult position to be in, especially if you're right out of school, because it's like, I just finished my bachelor's, you want me to come and solve all your problems, that type of thing. So you do need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable and not having all the answers.
Thank you for adding on to that. And with that being said, we're at time. So thank you, Chioma. Thank you, Wole. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming, and we really, really appreciate you. I personally have learned a lot about, different things that you guys do, and I hope that our audience who joined us today have learned a lot as well. So thank you again. For us, we are Niger to America. You can follow us on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook. We're going to upload this video after the session on our YouTube channel, so the recording will be available for you if there's certain portions of it that you want to catch in case you miss anything. But Wole and Chioma, do you have any final words?
Yeah, just thank you
before
for
we
having.
round up.
Thank you so much for having us, Yewande and Moyo. This was really good, and I really learned a lot too from all of you. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone, and we'll catch up with you in our next session. All right.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.